This is a Fox News alert. A train held captive by pro-Russian rebels is finally on the move. The train carrying some bodies of Flight 17 victims is finally heading out of Ukraine's war zone. So where is the train headed? And are the victims' families still in the dark? Plus, many witnesses on the ground now accusing the Russian separatists of looting evidence from the crash site. So far, the investigation blocked at every turn. So what are the Russian-backed separatists hiding? Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan live in Ukraine with the very latest. Steve, tell me, where are the bodies right now?
Greta, about 6:30 p.m. local time, those bodies left on a train out of rebel-controlled territory right near the crash site. They're heading north towards the city of Kharkov in Ukraine. That's government-controlled territory. The next move for those 280-plus bodies, plus the remains of as many as a dozen more passengers, will be a flight to Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, forensic studies will be made, DNA testing, to determine the identities of those bodies before being returned home. So after 2 days in the sun, more delay in a railroad car whose refrigeration worked part of the time, didn't work part of the time, those bodies are now out of rebel control, in Ukrainian government control, and about to begin to get the funeral that those innocent civilians deserve, Greta.
I don't mean to be too graphic about this, but do they have all the bodies? And I know that the impact was rather devastating to some of the bodies. I mean, has this been a professional job in giving dignity to these people and their families?
It's been anything but a professional job up until now. It's been, coal miners, volunteers, untrained emergency workers in forensics, people really just trying to help and do their best, but not a professional level. The experts have been kept out so far at every turn. After this long delay, now they're finally starting to get involved. There were Dutch forensic investigators for the first time at that train today. That's really the first sign of professionalism after more than 4 days into this tragedy, Greta.
Any looting or taking of any of the valuables on the ground? I heard rumors, the other day that people were taking things, but did rebels go through there and take anything?
I think there's two concerns about what was removed. First, even European crash site experts from the OSCE said that key bits of evidence have disappeared. These bits of evidence could be things like parts of the surface-to-air missile which brought the plane down. On the other hand, when you have a crash site more than 7 square miles with pieces and bodies everywhere, suitcases everywhere, I think looting is to be expected. A number of suitcases and bags that we've seen, including some of the pilots' Toomey bags, we could clearly see have been opened, all the zippers opened. Obviously, people have gone through those bags. Perhaps more upsetting, though, was 2 or 3 days in to still see body parts in the fields, and then the bodies pretty much picked up and dropped by the side of the road in body bags. Certainly, no one likes to see that.
Steve, thank you. And today, President Obama taking to the Rose Garden, telling the Russian separatists to give international investigators full access to the crash site. But about an hour later, it was the Malaysian Prime Minister who stepped in and announced he had brokered a deal with the rebels to grant safe access to the scene. So in handling this crisis, does the U.S. look inconsequential or worse, weak? Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I don't know what we could have done more, but I mean, it's like, how's the U.S. perceived in this? Are we leading this and forcing the rebels to turn over stuff? It seems a little late, a couple days late.
No, I think it's the exact opposite. I think that our role has been to focus on the minutia and not on the bigger political question. And this sounds hard given the emotion of the way the remains have been treated so disrespectfully, and the very real prospect that some of the evidence has been taken away from the crash scene. But I'll say it because all of this is fundamentally irrelevant. We know how that plane got shot down. It was shot down by either Russian or Ukrainian separatists under Russian command and control using a Russian surface-to-air missile. Now, we can certainly fill in all the details, fill in the gaps. I think we should do that. But what's really required now is political leadership, not on the crime scene investigation. This isn't the New York Police Department. This is the United States. And the president should be rallying international political opinion to do something about Putin's policy of aggression and belligerence. And that is simply not happening. In fact, I'll just say one more thing. The president's made it worse, because every day he rambles on about investigating the crash scene is another day that goes by where the momentum and the policy of rallying the West and the rest of the world against Putin is diminishing.
Is this a time where we can actually defang Putin, or is this impossible, or is it too late? Is it the golden opportunity to rally the world against him, or is he riding high?
Well, I think he's had some terrible setbacks in Ukraine in the past 6 to 8 months, but he's still playing cards as if he holds the high cards. And the reason he does that is because he can get away with it. I think the critical point here is not to focus obsessively on the minutia of the evidence, but to look for the strategic response. What has happened in Ukraine in the past 6 to 8 months is a reflection of a broader policy of Putin trying to reestablish Russian dominance in the former Soviet Union and in Eastern and Central Europe. That's what needs to be opposed. That's what the United States should focus on, rallying our NATO allies, going back to a strong national missile defense program, and looking at really stiff sanctions against Russia, not these pinpricks that we've been engaged in.
Here's part of the problem, is that whether we like it or not, we have engaged Putin with Syria and with the Iran nuclear program, the weapons program, which of course has gone a little bit belly up in the last day or so with an extension. With Syria, with the chemical weapons stockpile. Then you've got the situation where Germany loves that oil from Russia, and you've got England. The UK is deeply entwined with them economically. So how do we, so now with all these problems, these entanglements, what do we do?
Well, following one bad policy doesn't justify following several other bad policies. The negotiations with Russia over Syria were never going to work. The negotiations with Iran over its nuclear weapons program were never going to work, whether Russia cooperates with us or not. The bigger problem, and it's serious, is Western Europe's reliance on Russian oil and natural gas. That will take longer to correct, but in the meantime, what the president should be doing is pulling the Europeans along. It's a hard task. I think he's probably tired of it because it can be very arduous. We are the leader of the Western alliance, not Germany, not Britain, not France, not the Netherlands, not anybody else. If we don't lead, they won't follow. And right now, we're talking about whether we've got International Civil Aviation Organization inspectors on the ground instead of putting a line under this and stopping further Russian aggressiveness around Europe.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Saying Russia has trained the separatists and armed them big, really big, with anti-aircraft weapons. But President Obama stopping short of directly blaming President Putin for the takedown of that passenger jumbo jet. Senator Rand Paul joins us. Good evening, sir.
Glad to be with you.
Has this event, this horrible murder of 298 people, has that made Putin more powerful in the world, less powerful, emboldened him what?
I think it isolates him from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world needs to speak with one voice, one unified voice. And we've condemned it, and we obviously think it's terrible what has happened. But really, Europe needs to be more involved in this as well. The whole world needs to come forward and say, my goodness, you can't just shoot down commercial airliners. And so, no, I think it's something that I can't imagine what type of rebuke needs to be, but it needs to be as severe as it can be.
Like what, though? President Obama said from the Rose Garden today, that practically, he condemned it, as he should. But, what's the penalty?
Well, I think the only penalty that works in a situation like this, unless you're ready to, send troops into Ukraine, which I think most Americans are not, myself included. But I think the key really here is Europe. Europe does a lot of trade, and it's a bilateral thing. Everybody talks about, well, Europe requires and needs this gas. Well, Russia needs the money that comes from selling the gas. Trade's a two-way street, and the Europeans, if they want to, have a realistic or an admonishment that has teeth, they need to talk about trade sanctions on Russia.
There's something really perverse about the fact you shoot down 298 people in a plane, and you probably go unpunished. You shoot someone down on the street, whether it's in Europe or in D.C., in the United States, a single person, all of a sudden you're tried for murder and you're put away for life.
We've had other airliners being shot down, but I think historically, and some of these have been a long time ago, but my memory was that there was a significant and fairly immediate apology for saying we made mistakes. You know, that this wasn't an intentional downing of an airline. I guess it's hard for them to say that, too, because for the separatists, this wasn't a mistake. But you have to wonder how this is going to further the goal of the separatists to have taken down and killed 298 innocent people.
All right, let's go to Israel and Gaza. What are your thoughts about that tonight, how the U.S. is handling it? Are we looking strong and weak like leaders, or feckless and just bystanders?
You know, I don't know that when every civil war there has to be something that America is going to do. The one thing I've said is not America's role to criticize our allies for defending themselves. And Israel lives every day, you know, with bombs being rained down on them. And I don't think this was initiated by Israel. It was initiated by Gaza. And it seems to have come out of sort of the anger over first the 3 Israeli teenagers' death and then the Palestinian teenager death. But it also doesn't serve any purpose from a rational point of view for Hamas. How do they think they're going to win? All it does is then sort of justify sort of the civil war that occurred.
Well, they're keeping going. Hezbollah is backing them up. It doesn't seem like there's any end in sight. So how does this end? Is it?
Well,
do we have to rely on Secretary Kerry getting a ceasefire while he's in Cairo tonight? Or?
Well, I think we should try to be part of facilitating a ceasefire if we can. The other way it ends is Hamas runs out of rockets, and there have been some who have said that they have 2 or 3 weeks supply. And they say one of the perverse things of having so many jihadists in the Middle East is that there's competition for money, and Hamas is out of money and will shortly be out of missiles. This is also why Hamas joined the unity government. There were news reports saying they joined because they want our money. And that's what I've been trying to stop. I've got legislation that says no money should go to terrorists, and specifically no money to Hamas.
All right, let me turn to the Urban League. You're going there Friday, and in the Urban League, which has a lot of attention on these cities, and just this past weekend in Chicago, 40 people shot, including an 11-year-old girl dying at a slumber party, a bullet apparently going through and hitting her. What are we going to do? Why are you going to the Urban League? What are we doing about Chicago? Or what should we do?
One, our big cities have a lot of problems across America. Main problems being poverty, unemployment, but also violence. The poverty and the unemployment may make the violence worse, and so what I've said is that Republicans have some answers for this. And so I'll talk about how we bring economic opportunity to these cities by dramatically lowering taxes. I have a plan for bailing out Detroit, $1.3 billion. Not from Atlanta, not from Houston, but just by leaving money in Detroit that never gets sent to Washington, letting their own money help bail themselves out.
And it's not common to see Republicans at the Urban League. You and GOP Chairman Reince Priebus are the only 2. You're the only elected one.
But I'm excited about it because what we're doing is saying we are going to compete for the vote of people who live in the cities. If you look at that red-blue map across the United States, we win every rural county in America and we lose every big city. If we want to compete as a party, if Republicans want to compete as a party, we have to compete in the big cities, which means we need to have a policy prescription to how we're going to cure poverty, or we're going to diminish and lessen poverty.
Meet the Press has you as the GOP front runner this week.
That might be bad luck. I don't know. But it's better than not being considered. And at this point, all I know is I want to make the party bigger, so I want to be a big enough voice that people listen to say the only way the Republican Party wins is by becoming a more diverse party.
Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.